Welcome back and welcome to our faith panel part of the show. As I said before, joining me today, I'm delighted to say, is Jeremy Lawrence, the Rabbi, who is a Jewish educator and faith consultant, and Martyn Whittock, who's a historian, broadcaster, lay preacher, brilliant educator as well. They join me for two issues. The first one, initially, it's kind of been poo-pooed now, but this came from Robert Hardman's book on the royal family, suggesting that because Prince William doesn't go to church any more than apparently most Britons, although that's an interesting one because there's just been a survey out showing more Brits than ever have suddenly flocked back into churches. I digress. But like many people, it's weddings, funerals, and what have you, and maybe the odd Sunday at Easter and what have you. And there was some suggestion that he might not want to take up the mantle of being sort of leader of the faith. That, as I said, that's been poo-pooed now because it can be revealed that William will not cut ties with the Church of England when he's king. He will uphold the centuries-old tradition of the monarch being the church's supreme governor, despite not being a regular churchgoer. So, panel, my question to you is both these. If the king was to, in the strictest sense of the word, follow Christianity to the letter of the word, would it change the monarchy? How would it change the monarchy? Would it affect the way he and Harry are talking or not talking, or conflict, all of those sorts of things? That's one bit. And if he decided, you know what, because as we know, the king is very involved, very interested in different faiths, Sikhism, Hinduism, Islam, all of those. But just say that, as I have you with us, Rabbi, today, if he decided, you know what, I'm going to convert to Judaism, how would it change the monarchy? So let's kick off with you, Martyn, first and foremost. If the king was to rule, you know, when he becomes king, we should say, when he becomes king, what would the monarchy look like with all of the stuff going on, as I said, between him and Harry, etc., etc., if he was to strictly adhere to Christian teachings?
Well, as you know, I'm a licensed lay minister in the Church of England, so I'm part of that denomination over which the monarch is the supreme governor, and has been since 1534 under Henry VIII, repealed by Mary I in 1555, and brought back in again in 1558 by Elizabeth I. So I'm part of that denomination. But what I have to say is, what I'm saying now does not represent the official take of the Church of England. This is just my point of view, I have to say. And I'm one of those people that would not be distressed if the monarch was not the supreme governor of the Church of England. Now, I know a lot of people will not agree with me on this. I do appreciate that. But my take is that I don't think that birth is a category to be head of a church. I think faith is a category to be head of a church. And so, although it's a rather controversial view, I would say that what Henry VIII did in 1534 was actually to take on the monarchy something that I don't think is the role of the monarchy. And I have absolute respect for the monarchy, and I have absolute respect for the Church of England and the other churches and the other faiths of this nation as well. But I actually think that I wouldn't be distressed if a situation occurred in which the monarch was not supreme governor of the Church of England. And it's worth bearing in mind, in fact, in Scotland, since 1690, the Kirk's been the national church in Scotland, but the king is not the supreme governor of the church in Scotland. When the king, as the Queen before, attends church, they attend church there as a member of the church, not as its head. And I actually think, although it's very different in Scotland, I think there are things we could learn from the Scottish model. So I would not be distressed if the monarch was not supreme governor of the church in England, personally. But obviously, while he, or obviously with the Queen before is, then obviously I would hope and pray that they would bring into all their actions the kind of principles of Christian attitudes and outlook on things, as I know the Queen strove to do throughout her reign. But I'm also conscious of the fact that the family at the moment, the royal family, has very great difficulties, and therefore it won't be easy to do that in the current conflicted situation between the two brothers, for example. And so we should be praying for them in a gracious way, recognizing the fact that all families can go through significant problems, and at that point we give them the kind of advice that we have. I believe the Christian faith, in my case, has advice, and I'm sure that kind of advice for...
So what would it be, Martyn? What would it be? Love thy brother?
Yeah, well, I suspect that most of us who are members of any of the world faiths would be suggesting, arguing for forgiveness, reconciliation where possible, making a stand obviously on issues that are important, but always making room for reconciliation and bringing somebody back in. I mean, the parable of the prodigal son told by Jesus is this idea of somebody that kind of goes away but is welcomed back by God, and we believe that's a pattern for us to do as well as people. It's not easy to do, and I'm not claiming it is easy, but I think that would be my advice. Forgiveness and reconciliation is the key. But like I said, I do have that rather radical take on the governorship of the Church of England, which I know is not necessarily held by everybody in my church.
Thank you. Thank you. Rabbi, what if, you know, I laid out the scenario before, but what if, you know, when he was king, William said, you know what, I think I'll convert, and did go ahead and convert to Judaism. How would it change the monarchy if he was to adhere to his faith while wearing the crown?
So there is a frightening precedent for this that possibly people just don't know. In way back in the 11th century, William the Conqueror's son, William Rufus, actually alarmed the Christian establishment, such as it was, by suggesting that if the Jews got the better of the argument, he might just think about converting to Judaism. And I must tell you, that's long before the Church of England, but it caused quite a panic at the time. Anyway, he didn't, and understandably, we're not sure if the comment was a serious one, but it is recorded. I don't think I could begin to address the constitutional question within the Church of England. That would be a very dangerous thing for a rabbi to do. I am prepared to say that when I met then Prince Charles in Sydney back 12, 13 years ago, he spoke to me with huge respect and love of his chief rabbi, the then Lord Jonathan Sacks, and his regard for faith in general, and his ability to say, I have a chief rabbi, I think showed him to be a greater man rather than a lesser man, even though he was going to go on to head the Church of England. Within the Jewish model of monarchy, we've had some good kings and many more bad kings that the Bible tells about. But in Jewish theology, there's a requirement for the king to have with him and to write for himself a Sefer Torah, a book of the law that he carries with him at all times. So into breakfast, into banquet, and into battle. And that's recognizing that the king isn't necessarily the most religious person around, but he needs to understand that his constitutional role demands that he acts correctly within the faith and recognizes that everything he does brings faith with him. And I would be very sorry to lose that element of faith leadership that the church, the crown has provided through the recent generations and the recent monarchs, and which I think King Charles has been an absolute exemplar, and which I imagine the Duke of Edinburgh, we'll try that again, which I imagine the Prince of Wales will go on to follow.
Yes, and the chief rabbi, I'm not wrong in saying, was a great mentor of yours as well, because as you know, I'm a Sydney girl as well as a London girl. I've got both passports, and I know you're a Kiwi originally, but
I'm a Londoner originally, and I've been through Israel, New Zealand, Australia, and now back to London.
Ah, you're so a bit like me. We've been around the world a few times.
I picked up children with passports wherever I've gone. But no, so the Chief Rabbi, Lord Sachs, and since then, the Chief Rabbi, Ephraim Mervis, have a great relationship, as I understand, with the King, and there is an exchange of views and understanding that tie our religious fabric in the country into the state fabric, which I think is something that England actually does very well.
Yeah, and that's one of the many things that makes me so pleased to hear that there's an interfaith or all faiths and no faiths march, and vigils taking place now, in solidarity with everyone's grief, with everyone's fears. It's nice to see that all faiths come together. On that note, moving on to our next question, which is all faiths coming together in kind of being shut out when it comes to a particular school. The headlines read, "Head sued for prayer ban, says all religions must make sacrifices." Now, this is Catherine Burblesing's school. It's in the High Court over the policy, which a student says targets Muslims. Now, apparently, I'm squishing this story down somewhat. There was no praying, or what have you, no prayer mats. A student decided to pray using their blazer in the playground. As a result, long story short, there was if you like, more and more Muslim students wanting to show their faith, and the headmistress claims that other students who were Muslim were pressured into maybe wearing their hijab, and there started to be instances of bullying and so on, and so banned praying, and as I believe it, within school time. Now, she also went ahead and said several religious groups at the school acknowledge and accept the secular nature of the school. She said these are the school's rules, even if they have expressed unease at times. The Jehovah's Witness, she goes on to say, the Jehovah's Witness family don't like the fact that we teach Macbeth at GCSE text because it has witches and it goes against their religion. Christians complain about revision on Sundays, and Hindus complain about eggs touching plates they eat on at lunchtime and want separate plates. And we say no to all of those things. So my question to the panel is, when it comes to going to school or college or anywhere else, a place of learning, and Martyn, you'll be a good one at this, should students have to park their faith at the door? No praying, what have you. It doesn't matter if, about food, as it was, as she says, with Hindus, or you might have some problem with text because it goes against their faith. Once you get to school, you have to park all that on the side. Now, without going into this particular case, because it's in court, I believe that we're waiting for the judge to come back with the verdict. But in general, Martyn, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, I taught for 35 years in the English comprehensive system, and I didn't teach within faith schools, I taught within secular schools, schools that did not have a faith commitment or a faith character, although I was a Christian working within those areas, and therefore I have great respect for the concept of secular education, and that certainly has been my experience. On the other hand, I would still say that if you have students who have a particular faith requirement as part of their faith, then I, as a Christian, would argue strongly one should make room for them. For example, Jewish students, you're going to be very careful about the administration of pork at lunchtime because you don't want to offend those children. You want to support their faith. Similarly, if Muslim children are being called upon, as they will be within their community, to pray at certain times a day, then I do feel as a Christian that it's reasonable to give them opportunities to do so. So actually, although I've taught within the secular system, and although basically I'm committed to the secular educational system, I still believe that if there are specific things within the religious life of the young people in your care, one should not do things that actively offend them, actively affront them, actively cause them to have to make decisions between their education and their faith. So although I can't comment on this particular situation, I would find it a matter of concern.
Just want to interrupt there. As a teacher, what if, you know, a Muslim child wants to pray 5 times a day? Would you then, as a teacher, be okay with a child perhaps removing themselves halfway through your lesson in order to do so?
I personally would be, yes.
You'd be okay with that?
Yes. Yes, because this is personally, because I believe that as a school, you come to a decision, you make it clear, you talk to parents, you talk to the kids, you talk to everybody, you explain what was going on and why it was going on, and where possible, you would try to organise the day that was possible for that child to do that. I personally would do that. Yes, I would.
Oh, okay. Rabbi, your thoughts?
So I was very privileged to be able to attend St. Paul's School growing up. Founded by John Colet. John Colet founded it for the peoples of all nations, albeit there were no Jews in England at the time that the school was founded. But within the school, and it was a church-based school, within the school there was the opportunity for Jewish prayers. And as was mentioned before, there was the opportunity not to have non-kosher food within the canteen, and indeed withdrawal from divinity, which was always a topic of discussion. In terms of, in terms of my own education, I actually feel I benefited hugely through attending a non-Jewish school and the opportunity to meet people from different faiths, different backgrounds, and the ethos of the school. So, that is my childhood. Having gone on, I've been a teacher and a governor in a variety of Jewish schools. Within New Zealand, the primary school we had, Kadima College, was about 2/3 Jewish, and it was a Jewish school with a Jewish ethos, but it had non-Jewish children attending it, and nobody was made to do anything they didn't want to do. When we expanded to form a secondary school, we needed to draw on a large non-Jewish parent and student body to enable that to happen. And so we actually ran slightly different tiers of religiosity in the junior and the senior end of the school to accommodate a Jewish school with a largely non-Jewish clientele. I mean, it's very important not to force religion in a hostile manner down the throats of people who have got their own tradition. Now, that said, if you sign up to come to a school of a certain ethos, there is it is reasonable to expect that you will buy into the ethos of that school. So if you've got an emphatically secular and non-religious school, and you know that's what you're signing up to, and you're coming to it, and you're paying in and contracting into that, then it is only reasonable that you adhere to the principles of the school itself, not only because that is what you've agreed, but the other parent body have come to that school and have joined that school because that is its ethos. And therefore, there is a need to respect the culture of the school. I think the Michaela School, looking at its website, even though it has what I think might be seen as some draconian principles in terms of, what will not be accepted, actually shows on its website a happy and mixed faith, respectful community where people are wearing religious attire. I mean, one can't judge anything from its website, but I don't think it's an anti-religious school in that respect, and I don't think it should be seen as such. If the families contract to come to a school of a certain ethos, then you need to be able to respect that. But similarly, as Martyn said beforehand, in the event that you're a teacher in a classroom and somebody has a need to pray, to say that they can't take a prayer break, as long as it's not going to be disruptive, is something that I think would be highly impressive and thoroughly intolerant.
Now, asking you both and coming back to you, Martyn, do you think, therefore, in all schools, I mean, I don't think they teach it anymore. When I went to school, we had religious knowledge classes, which gave us an understanding. We had a lot of Quaker teachers at my school as well, but it gave us an understanding of lots of different faiths. Do you think that's imperative for the understanding of our fellow human beings? Do you think it's to the detriment of people? Nobody's trying to convert anybody. It's just teaching kids. Some people believe this, some people believe that, etc., etc. Do you think not having that within the school curriculum is doing young people a disfavor?
Absolutely. As well as a history teacher for 35 years, I taught religious studies. And in religious studies, we teach the world faith. We don't teach to convert. We teach about Judaism. We teach about Christianity, Islam, Hinduism, Buddhism. We introduce young people to these world faiths so they understand what they are about, so they have empathy with people in those world faiths, and so that they can understand their neighbors, their friends, their mates, the people on the bus better. And the aim of religious studies or religious education now is, in my opinion, as it always should be, to introduce young people to world faiths and an understanding of world faiths without preaching to convert. And that's how I taught it, and that's how all the RE or RS teachers that I knew taught it. And that's what I would support as being absolutely essential in all secondary education.
No, I have to agree with that. Rabbi, it's interesting because in Australia, they took religious knowledge, or RE, whatever you want to call it, out of schools. And I know that they've had to put in, because a friend of mine has retrained, he was a banker initially, he's retrained to become an ethics teacher. They found something going on within schools, a void, for want of a better word, maybe it was a spiritual void, and had to introduce ethics, as they call it, in order to fill that space. I think that's really interesting.
I think it is interesting. I think it shows that there is a need to teach how to interpret values and how to prioritize rights and wrongs of, different shades, which a good ethics class will enable you to do. And there are some, fabulous ethics teachers in Australia, people like Peter Singer, who's quite an inspirational writer, thoroughly anti-religious individual. But I think there's something you lose equally if you don't teach the religion. As Martyn was saying, comparative religions or an understanding of world religions is important. I think religious literacy is something that's very necessary in a global world, and global businesses and global education. It's important to be able to understand the significance that different faiths ascribe to their texts as well. So one of the exercises that I particularly enjoy is scriptural reasoning, where a Jewish, a Christian, and a Muslim teacher, for example, will each present a text on a particular idea, like fasting, or like holiness, or like the Messiah, any topic you might choose, and actually present it the way I understand it, and then using my eyes on other people's holy texts as well to create some kind of dialogue. And in that, I'm not actually diminishing my faith because I'm drawing on their traditions. I'm expanding my vocabulary. And one of the things that, while I'm a champion of religious education in schools, and Jewish schools and Muslim schools, for each religion to be able to teach its own, equally, I think the exposure to the other and to each other, and the exposure to our reverence for our scriptures and our ethical bases, are absolutely critical to creating a narrative of peace in the world.
I couldn't agree with you more. And coming back to you, Martyn, and we'll discuss this. Many of the marches, many of the reported things that were chanted, I'm talking about what the press has called pro-Palestinian marches. I'm not sure the marchers would call that, but it seems to me a lot of the chanting, or some of the chanting, or some of the things people came out with, was born out of rank ignorance. There was somebody, a little clip on social media where somebody went around and actually asked young people, what does this mean? What is the significance? And they didn't have a clue.
Yeah. Ignorance begets fear. Fear begets hatred. Hatred begets violence. We must head it off at source. We must tackle ignorance. We must talk to each other. Disagree nicely, as I used to say to kids.
I love that. Disagree nicely. Rabbi?
Oh, I think we should definitely disagree nicely. We shouldn't be afraid to disagree, but we should definitely do it nicely. It is very worrying that some of the language that has been used and some of the rhetoric, people have purloined religious terminology and are using it. I don't think it's wrong that we highlight where religious terminology is abused and where there are calls for, when some of the chants have been genocidal, and some of them have been quite horrific. And do not show a respect for the fact that, in fact, there are two nations, if I can use that word loosely here. There are two nations where parents and children are suffering because of a problem. And religious rhetoric has been ramped up to justify things, but actually we need to use language of dialogue and peace to take some of the religious polarization out of it and to focus on the human aspect, which applies to both sides.
I've got to jump in there because we're almost out of time. It's been such a fascinating conversation. Thank you both for just a great faith panel. We'll be back with more right after this.
This is TalkTV.